Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
You know, Marcus, I love technology, but only when it works. And sometimes it doesn't matter whether you're in a co-working space or not, whether you're on a Mac or whether you're on Windows. Sometimes things just don't work.
Well, get used to the nomad lifestyle, because this is not going the way.
I know it's not going to go away, but you know what? In general, we've had really, really great luck with all of our guests, and Zencastr has been an amazing addition for recording for us. And on that shameless, pointless plug, tell me exactly who's on the show today.
So today we had Michael Brown with us and his book, Do Agree, Don't Agree. If you look at the title, the NT is struck out. So the book is about disagreement, and I even disagree with what the title really is. Is it do agree or don't agree? I couldn't figure it out because I didn't ask that particular thing because we had so much better things to talk to him about. But what were your takeaways?
So I think it was a really good book. As you say, the title leaves me questioning what is the actual title of the book, and I think a lot of people will be confused. But what he's really trying to do is talk about disagreement and how to diffuse some disagreement. And I liked the discussion that we had where we were talking about competition versus collaboration, which he refers to as the C word in his book, and the importance of having trust if we're going to have diversity and inclusion and be able to work through disagreement. The question that I didn't get to ask that I wanted to ask was, all of his strategies are really great. Will any of them work if I'm the only one that wants to apply them? I think there are too many times that there are other people that we're talking to, and they may not care what our strategies are, and they may not care what our principles are. They want the competition, they want the conflict, and then I think we're kind of screwed. So you got to get everybody on the same page to agree we're going to have discourse and dialogue and not just be tribal and kind of shoot arrows and throw rocks at one another. But that's my two takeaways. What were yours?
Yeah, as usual, it's that kind of thing, isn't it? People who don't know they're having a problem will not look for solutions. Well, it was really interesting because we're having a double act today, recording two in one day, literally within the hour. So we just came off with Cindy on power dynamics, and so disagreement is full of power dynamics. So there was an odd thread going through it. What I quite like, interestingly, is so you talked about value outing of being a really good mechanic to maybe get teams to collaborate more by actually getting out your own values as an initial exercise to just align better. Not just about what's the target, what we're going to achieve here, but actually, well, what's your value toward it? What do you care about in these things? So value outing is quite interesting. And then so that's one thing he has in there. There's a couple of other things he has in the book as well that some we talk about. But I want to get it also back to the fact, and I want to really mention this right now for people to hopefully move on to the interview and listen to it, is that the fact that, he had a massive falling out with his company and he wrote the book because of it. And I think it's quite going into the theme or history of books like, David Marquet leaving the US Navy because he got angry that it didn't let him to do amazing work, continue his amazing work. And then he wrote a book. So there's a lot of books being written because people are a bit angry, or it makes the books really raw, and I found those books really, really insightful. And that by itself, why he wrote the book, coming out of a really raw experience of having had this company for over 10 years and having a falling out because of the conflict. I think, that's the kind of stuff that makes someone write a book that's just really there, and you're going to learn a lot from it. Because it's all fine and dandy talking about success and that stuff, but it's actually really, really more interesting, for me at least, to learn something when something goes wrong and someone actually candidly writes about it. And this is one of those books, and I quite like that about it.
Yeah, and he's got some really great lessons as to what he learned, what happened, and more in the podcast. So why don't we go and listen to him now?
Let's go there. Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencastr. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, wickedpodcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Michael Brown. Hello, Michael. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, so are we. So let's start at the top as usual. So please, if you would tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
Who am I? Well, I am Michael Brown. I'm an author, and which is a fairly recent career development, I have to say. And prior to that, I'm an entrepreneur, long-term founder of creative industries business, and or businesses more correctly, and it's an anecdotal tale from one of those businesses that leads me to the story of behind the book, which is that I'd spectacularly fallen out with my fellow shareholders, if you like, in a business that I founded and run for nearly a decade as the managing director, and I guess it's fair to say that what started as everyday minor boardroom disputes, if you like, over the direction of the enterprise, turned into what could only be described as a power struggle, and that, I guess, that was a reasonably protracted period of time. But it culminated one fine day, and fine's not really quite the right adjective to use, in what could only be described as a public firework display, shall we say, of red hot emotions on the office floor, literally in front of everybody who worked for us. The behaviours didn't have much dignity, and while it was, I guess, for a witness, would have been compelling viewing, we might have sold front row seats on Ticketmaster. I think I used that line in the book. There was no going back from that flare up. The fallout threatened the security of a young family I had at the time, a lot older now. It certainly disrupted the highly valued team we'd put together. It cost all the partners in the business, there were two other shareholders apart from me, a small fortune in legal fees, and a business we'd given so much to turned, well, to ashes, essentially, in the aftermath of that. And obviously, as you might expect, that got me to the period after that got me into, well, a whole load of soul searching. Could we have done things differently? The answer to that is of course, definitely. Knowing how to, and that was a completely different matter. And I guess of all the questions I asked myself in that period of reflection, one kept coming back, and it was, did my business partners have a position in this ongoing argument that was at least as valid as mine? And it did take me a long time to reach any kind of conclusion on that, which was, yes, they definitely did. And of course, that is the problem, is that with disagreement, it escalates when you try to sort it out. And in fact, one of the interesting things I found in my journey, because that was the precursor to the journey to the book, one of the interesting times, which I certainly didn't recognize in myself, was this psychological phenomena, which is known as attribution bias. And that's where the deadlocks that prevent everyone moving forward in an argument or a negotiation or a disagreement are likely to be blamed on the other side by both sides, which is mad, isn't it, really? So I guess one of my failures was a failure to recognize my attribution bias, and it was in that sort of failure I thought, there's not really a lay person's guide to conflict and conflict resolution. There's all this science about it, and ordinary people who are just trying to establish a business don't know too much. So I thought here's a business idea. Why don't I create a layperson's guide to conflict resolution, but uniquely resolution in context of looking at the perspective from the person on the other side of the argument. So taking perspective. Yeah, so that was a fairly elongated answer to your first question. Apologies.
Yeah. Well, I'll probably I want to say, well, that's great, even though I'm sure the process wasn't.
Yeah.
But I think some of the best books we had on the show came out of these strong emotions and kind of reflecting back on it. I think those things, those types of books tend to have the best insight and the most approachable and value for people, really. So, and I might start with a bit of a contentious question now, which is, you end up in these kind of very polarized places eventually.
Yes.
So is it therefore that, are we living in this kind of black and white world, or what do you see why things...
Well, I think
do we always have to end up in these kind of black and white, so polarized places? Is it already there in the beginning?
Well, look, I think I see what you're driving at, and I get what is interesting, because what the mission of the book, if you like, it's not going back to that situation. You could blame that on flawed culture in many ways. So obviously there are human beings at fault in some way, shape, or form in any kind of disagreement. But also there's a culture certainly in organizational life, and my contention is that most organizational culture is flawed. And if that weren't the case, things like the gender pay gap, plastic in our seas, inequality at work, institutional racism, they wouldn't exist. But the thing, of course, is when you bring lots of people together with lots of different opinions and conflicting cultures and different cultures, then in a way you're seeding the potential for conflict in many ways, aren't you? But here's the thing: if you want to change the world in some way, shape, or form, then you're going to meet, aren't you, lots of people who disagree with your worldview. And when you think about that, that is natural human discourse. It should be okay, shouldn't it, to disagree with somebody else's point of view. And in one sense, we seem to have lost the art, if you like, of debate, because we become polarized, don't we? And I think that is certainly amplified by social media, where it becomes easier to assertively proclaim your opinion, free of any payback, because you're not doing it face to face, aren't you? So it's easier to be more aggressive on social media. But as I say, it's natural human discourse. It should be okay to express a disagreement, but it's finding the way through that disagreement, that taking perspective. Why is this person disagreeing with me? What life experiences has that person had, or that group of people had, that are so different to mine, that therefore brings them to a different worldview and a different point of view to me? So trying to express that, trying to work your way through that is essentially the art of conflict resolution. It's the art of negotiation, isn't it? So we have to accept that a polarized position shouldn't really be the natural position, because we haven't evolved like that. We've evolved, haven't we, as collaborators?
Absolutely. We're essentially pack animals, aren't we? But and there's one of the interesting things right at the beginning of the book, where you actually go into, children, how children first get into that, and the attitude that it's probably been existing since the 70s. I might be wrong, but generally around saying, oh, you know what, let the kids figure it out.
Yes.
They will learn by figuring it out themselves. But actually, that's not quite right, is it? Because if you don't show them the alternative, they just go with their emotions and might end up in the wrong place and might not learn it. So how much do you see sometimes that lack of skill already being originated in our childhood by our first experiences?
Yeah, well, that was interesting because I do some maths on that, and I should add that as I was approaching this in layperson's terms, I've got no qualifications in psychology or child psychology, but one of the first ports of call, if you like, in my research was thinking about the amount of I have two other siblings, and I've got a brother who's quite close in age to me, and we used to fall out all the time. And my mum, bless her, would tear her hair out about that, and that got me and that got me to thinking about, okay, that's the seek gap, because I like, yeah, I've enjoyed. It's definitely fair to say that I've enjoyed conflict in the past, and working around that was a sort of was a self improvement lesson as well for myself. Um, but I was just trying to get to the seat of that, and I started looking at the frequency of childhood conflict, and that took me to the work of an American academic called Professor Laurie Kramer, who'd done so much work into that. And there's I'd have to read the exact maths, but she, over the long-term studies that she'd led, she said that childhood sibling conflict, there were at least 3.5 instances of that on average per hour in every child with a sibling between the ages of 4 and 8. And that, furthermore, ate up about 10 minutes in every hour. And I started doing the maths on that, which Laurie Kramer hadn't done. And pretty much in between those age groups, it was 4,875 hours of pure conflict between the ages of 4 and 8. And of course, if you start factoring in middle childhood and then adolescence, then of course conflict gets wider. So my contention was that we've got so much practice in falling out with our nearest and dearest, and it's not just our siblings, but yet we haven't had the same counter skills in learning how to negotiate our way out of that. The hard pressed parenting does have there is a tendency to let children sort these things out for themselves, and really what parents need to be doing is stepping in and encouraging perspective taking. How would you feel if this happened to you, and getting kids to reflect on that. Usually after the heat has dissipated somewhat, so not necessarily in the moment of the conflict, but a little later when you can you can review the situation after the aggression has died down. And the other interesting thing to that, as I compared it to, is that pretty much in the book, pretty much got to nearly 10,000 hours of conflict by the time you reach 15 or 16. And I compared that. I don't know if you guys have ever read Malcolm Gladwell's bestseller, which is Outliers, and that's way back 2007, 2000.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, 2007, I think. And where he did a whole load of maths around trying to spot why people became geniuses, and he did that from everybody from the Beatles to Bill Gates, and he worked out that to get to a genius level of whatever had made those people rich, or in whatever field of endeavor had made those people rich and or famous, they'd done roughly 10,000 hours of practice in it before they got to the tender age of 15 in Bill Gates' case. In his case, it was computer programming. And of course, I thought, well, okay. Well, then by that logic, then we're all geniuses at falling out with each other by the time we reach 16.
Well, I completely agree. And I read the Malcolm Gladwell book as well. We had another guest on this show, and I forget exactly which one it was, but there was a nuance to the 10,000 hours of deliberate practice as opposed to just practice at a level that was only slightly harder than your current ability on a moving scale. So I'm not sure 10,000 hours of screaming at my brother makes me a genius at conflict or not, but I like it as an idea. I'd
Oh
like
yeah,
to
it
just
was an idea. Yeah. Um, for sure, it was
So,
just that there's a lot of practice in there, and as you begin to get, as you begin to get you assert yourself in a certain way. Maybe you have a tendency then to therefore get what you want, depending on how good your brother or sister may be at
yes.
complex that. So there would be a learning curve, albeit at the subconscious level, which may propel you to genius levels. But whatever, if we should probably not describe it as genius, what we should describe it as is a habit,
Yes.
and therefore we tend to lean on our habits, don't we? So we might therefore gravitate to finding a way to fall out as opposed to finding a way to work it out.
So let me move on to a slightly different angle. So you have a chapter entitled, dropping the C word,
Yes.
collaboration.
Yeah.
And we've talked to a lot of authors. We read more than 60 some odd books, and diversity of experiences and diversity of opinions and the natural conflict can indeed lead to some amazing sort of results. But the other C word is competition.
Mm.
And I think you can actually achieve the collaboration without the competition if you have trust. So when you're looking at conflict resolution, how do you see trust playing in between the parties, whether it's one or two parties or 8 or 9 parties? How do you see trust factoring into this idea?
It's a really good question, actually. And I'm gonna try and sort of break it down, because obviously trust has to be earned, um, uh, and before it's established, and then if I then set that in organizational life, which is where the book obviously is set, then most organizations, of course, encourage high structured by hierarchy, which in and of themselves that also encourage or gives rise to competitive behavior. And one of the interesting things about collaboration in terms of its evolutionary benefit was that collaboration evolved out of a competitive in order for us to compete better. And this goes back to altruism as well. So in order to collaborate with a group, you need to offer something that is beneficial to the group, and that might be your experience, your abilities, your knowledge, and in so doing, the fact that you become trusted within the group increases the likelihood, in evolutionary terms, that you will survive longer, that you will find a mate, and obviously then and procreate and communicate your genes into the future. So the act of collaboration itself arises from the competitive urge, in evolutionary terms. And then if you set that inside an organization, and I sort of attempted to prove this in the organization that I ran, which or I should actually say helps to run, because when you get an organization this side, nearly 4,000 people, you need lots of people in the senior leadership side as well. But in an effort to try and make collaboration and competition work together, I then thought, well, what is the natural disposition of the people who work in our line of work? And obviously I work in media, advertising, and marketing, and I recognize that might be a different breed of people who may work in healthcare, for instance. So what might be right from these findings may not be the same if you're working in the NHS. But I did some ongoing research with those people, and it was quite interesting. So, and I asked them if you would do the same if you got asked in an interview, went to a job interview, and in that job interview you get asked this all the time: are you a team player? Obviously, the intellectually right choices I was just outlined would be to say yeah, right. So, but your instincts, as I previously said, may scream otherwise. So. And in my survey, I was asking people to recall their first day in the job. So before any trust or relationships had been established with anyone in the organization, And if they came to the role thinking of themselves as team players, and 77.5%, and these are the exact maths, so I know this because I did it for the long term, they claimed yes, always. And then 20% said yes, but only sometimes, which is, it's revealingly a flexible approach, isn't it? And they obviously suggest they only play ball when it's advantageous to them, and it's definitely evolutionary in nature. And then there was a small minority who were brutally honest, 2.55%, and that's again is exact, who said an outright no, none of the time. So obviously that minority were honest. So how about the rest then? And then so I tried to cross section that with or cross compare that with, so going back to their first day, imagining do they come into the job, on a flight of fancy, do they imagine getting promoted into the future at some point? And 79%, so a significant majority, said yes. And intriguingly, nearly 50%, it was 48%, said they imagined working their way all the way to the top, CEO, so literally rising above everybody. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because promotion elevates you above your colleagues. And really, when you think about that, going back to your question, that jars against the success of the team, which demands everyone accept equal reward, equal recognition, all that sort of stuff. So it raises that question, is it possible? Is it possible to be truly collaborative if you also seek personal glory? And what can we do to deconstruct our organizations who are hierarchical in nature to therefore better establish trust, collaboration, etc.? And that goes back, to earning the trust. You have to actually therefore re-examine yourself to check out your true motivations. And if your true motivation is about personal glory, you have to be honest with yourself, excuse me. Then there's lots of exercises, which takes a bit of commitment. It's like yoga it's like internal yoga, I suppose, to work around that, to navigate around that.
And as much as I'd like to hear the rest of that, we always have more questions than we have time.
Of course, sorry. And I did bang on about with the answer to that, didn't I? Sorry.
That's all right. And I think Marcus has one more question, and I might encourage both Marcus to ask a short question and you to give a short answer. And I know I've got no chance on either of those. Over to you, Mark.
So there we go then. So what I want to ask with that, leaning up to that. So you talk about value outing. So if you talk about, how many people want to go there, how many people get up, higher up, be CEO. You have group dynamic collaboration built on trust. One way of building trust is to show no vulnerability by, value outing. So you trust you're the first one to trust, right? If you don't trust, nobody else trusts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of how it works. So how do you align value outing by basically saying, this is what I believe in, which is a great way to establish collaboration, equal level playing field, against what you just said earlier by saying, well, some people actually don't want that. They want to grow higher. They want to manage other people. They want to get into the power thing.
Yeah.
Would they ever therefore do that? Therefore, could they ever collaborate? That feels like a paradox. What's your view on that in 2 or 3 sentences?
2 or 3 sentences. Well, values outing was an exercise for me, again, in context of the teams who were working into the business. And it was an attempt to find complementary values so that you could divide your teams up into into smaller groups that had complementary as opposed to conflicting values. And the inspiration behind that is also linked to, I guess, the diversity inclusion conversation that is so prevalent now. And again, a part of the problem inherent, I think, in old school values framework, corporate values frameworks. And it was a direct question of, so in a new business context where diversity is much needed and demanded, then really, does it make sense for all of your team to conform, if you like, to a very narrow corporate values framework of about 4 or 5 descriptors, which is on average how many values your average corporation has. So I'm trying to turn that on its head. So we need diversity, not only of things like race, gender, religion, but qualities, experience, ideas, opinions, etc. So the values outing exercise was to try and find complementary values that didn't cut against the grain of each other. So if you value fair play or equality at work, then you might also have a complementary quality of, for instance, being brave, because you would need to be brave, wouldn't you, to stand up for equality or fairness at work.
And I'm going to be brave now, and I'm going to cut you off in the middle of your answer.
Yeah.
Michael, it's been a real joy having you on the program today. We both enjoyed reading the book. It is very much, as you said, an accessible way of looking at whether agreement is possible or whether it's not. We are thrilled to have had you on the show today.
Well, it's lovely, and I'm sorry we didn't get through all the questions. Yeah, I will work on. If you ever invite me back to talk about the second book, then I will work at finding a way to cut down my answers for sure.
Wait, did you just say second book? Is there a second book coming?
I'm developing a framework for a second book. What's interesting about non-fiction is you don't have to have completed the book to get the publishing deal. All you need to complete is a framework and a marketing proposal.
We'll have to hear more about that, and we'll put the notes to it in the show notes for the show. But other than that, thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your day in Brighton.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's been a joy. Lovely.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.